use SOLO Taxonomy to plan your lessons. I'm going to look a bit about the activities, because that's one of the biggest questions I get is, I kind of get the idea of SOLO Taxonomy, but can you please go through some activities and show me what they look like, and I'll do that. I'll show you what I mean by assessment. I've talked about a lot about how teachers can set up success criteria to assess on lessons. I've talked about feedback, I've talked about peer assessment and assessment for learning, and I'll show you how it will work in a lesson using some of the tools which SOLO Taxonomy offers. I'll show you some actual examples which I think Lee has got in a Dropbox ready to show you, and also I'll show you how SOLO Taxonomy isn't just a linear progress. Sometimes with Bloom's Taxonomy you have to start at the bottom and move your way up to the top. As we go through this, I'll show you how actually SOLO Taxonomy can allow you to start thinking about starting at the top and moving backwards and so forth. So we want to start moving on to the first bit, please. We can then show you how to use it in your planning. Okay, so one of the first things which I say is, when I first started being a PE teacher, I didn't really get taught how to teach theory lessons, and for a little while I used Bloom's, a little while I used pretty much just PowerPoint all the time. I used worksheets for a while. I even used the accelerated learning cycle for a while, and it was pretty much a bit of a mishmash. Only when I used Solo did I actually things start clicking into place, and I really understood actually a very solid, sturdy way of delivering topics in your lesson, going from a nice, easy way up to a real challenging way for your students. So we look at the first thing we're going to talk about, one of the first tools that you can actually use. If we click to the next slide. When I started thinking about my lessons that I was going to start teaching my students, one of the first things you can do, obviously with the taxonomy in mind, is start thinking about what it is you want to get from your students in the lesson. One of the key things, and you can get this from Pam Hook's website, which is on the bottom left hand side there, Hooked on Learning, is I started thinking about, at each different stage of my lesson, what key things must my students know. So, for instance, at the very low level, I just want them pretty much to identify the topic or a particular fact of my topic which I'm going to be teaching them. At the second level, at the multi-structure level, I may want my students to start thinking about listing and defining things and start actually describing things, much like they're expected to do in the exam, and obviously much like it comes part and parcel with the subjects we're teaching. There are lots of elements where the students have to list and define and describe things. When I then start thinking about my plan of lesson, I move up, and I then want to think, well actually maybe I need to compare things and contrast things and start relating things and apply things. So that'd be the relational level, and then right at the very top, where they need to evaluate, predict, theorise, hypothesise, that's when I'm really going to stretch my students. And Pam Hook has created this little verb sheet, which is absolutely fantastic. So whenever I start thinking about the lesson now, particularly when I'm thinking about the objectives, the learning outcomes that I'm trying to be teaching my students or trying to reach in my students, I look through these first and start thinking, at which stages in my lessons am I working up, and can I get these keywords into my lesson? If we click to the next slide, you'll see that I've actually started using them when I'm doing my lesson objectives. So this is the way that I structure my lesson objectives now. So I have the main lesson objective at the start, at the very top in the arrow, and then as you can see in the various boxes, it's talking about the different stages. So the students can actually know the various components of obviously how PE is structured in the school. This is an old topic that we taught a few years ago, then obviously they're a bit multi-structural, they know the different components. If at the second level, which is the relational level, my students can actually start seeing how they link together within a school. Obviously they're relating things, that's our relational level. And right at the very top, I want students to start thinking about, in school sport, how it's organised, how it's linked together, and how other strategies, such as trying to think how some of the governing bodies play their roles, how things like Sport England play their roles, how things like the Healthy Eating Programme play their role within school. Then now we start linking lots of other subjects together and other topics together. I'm going to try and stretch my students. And my students can look at that, and instantly they can tick off as they go through the lesson what they're learning and what they're understanding. So it's a fantastically easy way of trying to get students to see the progress and see the steps which we're going to be making as we go through the lesson using the taxonomy. They know they're going to know the facts, they know they're going to have to link it together at some point, and right at the very top, they know they're going to have to start drawing in other topics to try and link it together. And my students have a clear vision, a clear focus of where they're going to go. If we go to the next slide. So once you've linked it all together, I then start thinking about in my lesson, how can I start getting my students to go from the shallow level of learning up to a deep level of learning? Still using those key verbs in the back of my head, so define at the bottom and obviously at the top, thinking about words like evaluate. I then start thinking, actually, with the particular topic I'm teaching, I'll go back to diet for example, how can I ensure that students know what diet is, or what nutrition means? How do they know the different components of nutrition? How can they then relate nutrition and diet to, and the nutrients obviously, to an athlete? And then how can they flip it on their head or tie in other topics? And that's where I start using the taxonomy to start planning my lesson. If I go to the next slide, this is a SOLO Taxonomy sheet. It's a very simple sheet, and again you can download it on various websites. This is from Pam Hook's website, and I use this sheet very, very quickly. I've even gone beyond this now. I simply just put these the symbols in my organiser or on a scrap of paper up the left hand side, and I start thinking about how I'm going to plan my lesson. And this has literally become my lesson plan now. So if I click to the next slide, you can see on the screen now, I'm going to talk through my lesson. I'm teaching a lesson and I'm now thinking, and it's all about somatotypes, what stage I'm going to go through. So the very first thing, at the very start of the lesson, at the bottom box, this is just for my plan. I'm going to try and get the students to sit down and find out what they already know. So at pre-structural stage, I need to find out what they know. So in my lesson, at the very start of the lesson, I'm going to ask a question to the students. Okay guys, we're going to do somatotype today. What do you already know about this topic? They then obviously go away and work, and so on. For the bottom level of my topic then, I'm going to move to unistructural, and I'm going to introduce to my students the term somatotype, and I'm going to explain what it means and give them the definition of what the word somatotype actually means. So I know the first bit of my lesson is going to be covering that. When I know the students have done that, the next part of my lesson, I'm going to get to the multistructural stage, and I'm going to introduce the various types of somatotypes that students need to know. So endomorph, ectomorph, and mesomorph. I'm going to, for each one of those, get students to look at the various characteristics of them, and then start thinking about the different diagrams and the different factors of each of those particular somatotypes. So already in the first part of my lesson, I've asked them what they know, I've taught them what somatotype means, and then I'm going to teach them the individual components of somatotype and the 3 different somatotypes they need to know. I then start thinking, that's the mastery bit of my lesson, that's the shallow learning. When I get into the latter part of my lessons, I now need to start moving some students up to the relational stage. So what I'm going to do now is, I'm now going to start introducing sporting examples. I'm going to get students to start thinking about relating sporting examples to different types of somatotypes, so they can start seeing which sport an ectomorph will be best suited for, which sport a mesomorph will be best suited for, and obviously which sport a endomorph, I can't remember which one I said now, is best suited for as well. I'm then going to start showing them how they're all interrelated and how each one can be scored on a scale, and then on the Sheldon scale, and then they can start thinking that each individual person has a percentage or a part of each of the 3 somatotypes for each individual physique. So again, students are not now thinking about an endomorph is this, mesomorph is that, ectomorph is this. They now start seeing how they're related to sports, and they also start seeing that actually every single person is a combination of all 3 different types of somatotype. When students have done this, I'm then going to think about what is the highest thing that I could possibly get my students to do in this lesson or in this series of lessons to get them to really understand. So right at the very top, I'm then going to get students with the thinking about the key verbs which are on the taxonomy ladder. One of them was evaluate. So now I want to get students to evaluate the need for particular body shapes for particular sports. So actually, why is it? I've told you that maybe a mesomorph will be really suited for a sprinter, but why is it? So then students are going to have to start bringing in prior knowledge from the muscular system topics which they may have covered, maybe principles of training, methods of training, and start thinking about why a mesomorph will be best suited as a sprinter, and so on. So we're now bringing in different topics and talking about maybe it's because of the training they do, maybe because of obviously the method training they do, and how that gives them an advantage of obviously in sprinting compared to other athletes. It may already start looking at things such as how a different particular mesomorph would, how a different somatotype may affect the levels of performance. So what happens if a long jumper or a high jumper, for instance, actually did start putting on a bit more muscle? And that muscle mass obviously increases their mesomorph score, and would that have an adverse effect on obviously how well they can actually perform the long jump or the high jump? So again, I'm trying to get students, now they know all the individual facts and they can relate them all together, I'm now trying to get them to flip it on their head and start thinking about how other topics play a part. What would happen if a Sheldon score was increased on one particular somatotype when actually another one was needed? So trying to get students to really manipulate the information I've taught them and start thinking about how it all interlinks together.